Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. All right, man, I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. So I went ahead and went back and I took another Title Tuesday game. So I got Dmitry Andreikin versus Wesley. So, and this is kind of a roller coaster game. Both players really had some chances in this one. So yeah, of course, all my people that are coming from the Philippines, I will say mabuhay. Magandang umaga, magandang let me see. Hapon, magandang araw, magandang gabi. Masaya ako, Makita King Muli. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. Maraming salamat aking makaibigan. For sure. And anybody who is coming from Russia, I will say privyet. Dobry otra. Kakadela. Spasibo for coming by and taking a look at my stuff. I appreciate you guys very much, as always. But yes, if you're ready to go, let's take a look, see what we got for this game. All right, so we got the move D4. And we have the move D5. We got C4. And then we have pawn takes C4. So we have the Queen's Gambit accepted. And then we just simply have E3. You know, we're just ready immediately to go ahead and take this bishop back. You can always go like E4. You know, you're going to kind of get attacked a little bit with E4. You know, with like E5s and C5s and stuff like that. So it just kind of depends on what you want to play. But you do have a lot of options as white. We do see the move knight to f6, and this is just pretty much like allowing white to take back the pawn with like no severe resistance. And then we do see bishop taking c4. You know, you at this level of play, master level play, you don't normally see people playing like b5 and, you know, really desperately trying to hold on to the pawn, because you just really need one more tempo to really be able to do that. So if you play a Slav, if you do the Slav and then you have a situation where pawn takes, you do kind of have the ability to play b5. And I mean, you really need two tempo to really just fully hold that pawn. And it kind of depends on white. You know, if white allows you to, you know, just pretty much keep the pawn, then you just got a pawn, bro. But don't depend on your opponent to help you, you know, keep something. You know, just play solidly, right? Just like, you know, Bobby Fischer. He said he don't believe in psychology. He believes in good moves. That's me too. I believe in good moves. Just play solid. We do see the move e6. We got knight to f3 and we got c5. Of course, like I always say, black is going to be trying to break down this nice little center you have established. And you do want to trade a wing pawn for a central pawn. And that is, for the most part, the whole idea of the Sicilian defense. Trying to change a wing pawn for a central pawn, and because black only has one central pawn right here, the c pawn is the perfect pawn to try to do that with. So we do see that. We got castles by white. We got a6. We got the move b3. We got pawn takes d4, knight takes d4. We got bishop to e7. Then we do have bishop to b2. We got castles by black, and then we do have bishop to e2. You know, b5 is going to be coming at some point. It's pretty much black's counterplay that is going to be bringing b5. You are castled kingside. So, you know, similar to the Sicilian, you know, you're going to have like some play over on this side of the board. So we do see b5. We got a4 immediately going after that pawn. You know, of course, you know, black cannot allow captures here because number one, the rook is pinned. I mean, the pawn is pinned to the rook because it's just over here lonely. And you will be winning a pawn on b5 if you allow it to happen. So black says, I'm not doing that. Pawn takes a4. We got rook taking a4. We see bishop to b7. And we see the move bishop to f3. And, you know, there are kind of a couple of things that you can do in this particular position. You know, automatically what's going to be the best scenario is going to be bishop takes f3 and then the queen takes f3, and then you might see something like queen to d5, you know, just plugging up that diagonal because the rook is, like I said, undefended. That is a possibility. But the unfortunate thing about this particular position is Wesley So plays a move that's not a move. It's not anywhere close to the top of the list in this position. And what he plays is the move, a rook to a7. Now, sometimes when you have a bishop on b7, you know, rook to a7 can be a good defensive move. And then once the bishop takes, you got the rook taken and you're like, you know, you're doing good. But this is not one of those positions. So we have reached a point in the game that the next move that we see Andreikin play is not only the novelty, but it is a move, you know, it is a guess the move situation. So it's a twofer. So if you want to pause the video and see what is the novelty as well as guess the move, go ahead and do so. Okay, so it's not often that I have the twofer. It's not often that you guess the move, which also happens to be the novelty of the game. But I mean, I think you guys probably are, kind of thinking about, what's wrong with knight to a7 or rook to a7. Is there some type of move that I can make? And I think, probably a good handful of y'all, if not half of y'all at least, probably came up with the move knight to b5. And knight to b5 is perfect because it is discovering a possibility of trading the queens. And as you guys know, this pawn is pinned. So b5 is a perfectly safe square to go to for the knight, and it is hitting the rook. And the problem is the rook really can't move because the bishop's going to be hanging on b7. So you have really put black in kind of a pickle. And this is, I mean, a pretty actually losing position for black. So, Wesley So is going to have to try to like claw his way back into this game. After we see knight to b5, we see a trade of bishops on f3. The queen takes d8, the rook takes d8, and then we do win the exchange by taking on a7. We have allowed the bishop to escape from f3, so the bishop goes back to b7, and then we do see the move rook to c1. We have to try to find a way to let our rook escape, because as of right now, it's kind of in jail. It doesn't really have anywhere that it can go because, of course, this isn't a pinned pawn anymore because there's nothing on a7. So, you kind of need to play with a little finesse. We do see knight going down to e4, and this actually kind of just makes things worse. It allows white to make a move rook a to c4, and you are threatening both of these bishops, putting the rook there. And if the bishop does back up, you are threatening rook to c8. And you are threatening, this knight if you move rook to c8. So, I mean, you have a lot of things that you're doing. So we would probably see the bishop going back to f8, saving one of them because you can't really move the bishop anywhere. The other one, and then you would automatically go to try to trade rooks down. If in this position you can possibly trade rooks, you are just 1000% winning the game. Of course, you can always blunder, but I mean, you should be able to probably grind this away into a win because you're just going to be up like so much material in the exchanges and everything. The bishop would probably try to plug on d5, but you would see bishop to a3, and you would probably have to try to get yourself out of the jam with knight to d7, but this does allow the knight back to c6. And I mean, white's rooks are really just too strong in this position. That it was an option, but like I said, we saw knight to e4, and then we saw the move knight up to c8, and we see the first move for Wesley So to try to kind of get himself out of the pickle that he's in. And we see bishop going to c5. So this is a really, really nicely found move because it does disconnect the protection of the rook on c8, or the knight on c8, because the rook on c1 was defending it, but now the bishop is in the way and they're disconnected. So, I mean, you still definitely have something that you can do as white, but this was a very, very necessary move for Wesley So to find. And so we have the idea correct from Andreikin, but it's unfortunately the wrong move in the position, and that is the move bishop to d4. And he just basically made the game completely even. The other move that he had, which is along the same idea lines, was actually b4. When you have a situation where you can choose between attacking with a pawn or a piece, most of the time it's better to attack with the pawn because the pawn is a lot more expendable than a piece. So that was the correct idea, like I said, but it just wasn't quite the right piece that he used to do so. So we did see the move bishop to d4, and this does allow black to pretty much completely get out of the jam that they're in. Rook takes c8. We see the move f3, and we see bishop to c6. We got pawn takes e4, but like I said, this does save Wesley So because he is able to get the exchange back, and that is the most important thing. Bishop takes on a4, and we have pawn taking a4, and it does kind of seem like, wait a minute, isn't black just kind of pinned a little bit though? Well, you will see that, I mean, Wesley So is making all the correct moves to just weasel his way out of the position that he was in. We see knight to d7, we see knight to d2, and we absolutely cannot allow this knight to get to b3 because we would literally just be winning, some material. So we see the move e5, which is perfectly on time. And I mean, you really can't do much in this particular position. other than just start to move your king. We got king to f1. The rook goes to c7. We see bishop taking c5, rook taking c5. So, you know, everything is pretty dead even. I will say the major difference in the position is black has a much better pawn structure than white does. So it just kind of makes white be a little bit more tied down, but it's not like the game is completely lost, right? So, you know, we got a pretty neck and neck situation going on. So you see what I mean about a roller coaster, right? We got rook over to b1. We see the move h5, just creating a little bit of lift for our king is always good. The king goes up to e2. We see rook down to c2 and rook to b7. And we see both players have the same exact idea. They're like, hey, man, I'm going to put my rook on the 7th. I'm going to be good. We do see the knight going to f6. We got king up to d3. Like, why not attack this rook, right? So the rook sidesteps over to a2. We are attacking this pawn on a4. We see the rook going to e7. And so, you know, we're pretty much each player's kind of matching each other's ideas. Like, we're going to get on the 7. We're going to attack a pawn. The only problem in this particular situation is Wesley So has the ability to activate some pieces and defend at the exact same time. And the first move that he finds to do that, which is the best move in the position, is knight to g4. And this is not only protecting the pawn on e5, it's also attacking this pawn on h3. So it takes a little bit of calculation going from f6 to what he's doing. And it's similar to the, you know, the Daniel Naroditsky game yesterday, you know, where he, you know, Danya just basically just calculated all these knight moves and stuff like that. So you do know that h3 is going to be coming because you have to save that pawn, right? But we do see the knight coming down to f2 at check, the king going over to c3, and then we have f6. And you guys see what I mean, where initially you're getting attacked on e5. You figure out a way to protect e5, taking the h3 move, checking the king, and then trading off the responsibilities of protection with e5 with f6. So, you know, Wesley So has just gotten himself into like a really, really nice position. And this is almost completely won. We do see the rook over to a7. We got knight down to d1, checking the king. Why not get a tempo? King goes to d3. We see knight back to f2, just probably trying to gain some time. The king goes back over, and then we do see rook to a4. And Wesley So is up an entire pawn here. Not only that, but his structure is much better. So even if, you know, if the structure was a little bit better for white, then, you know, maybe white can write home about a little something, but not quite. The king goes over to b3. We see rook down to a1. We got the king up to c4. We see rook over to a2. You know, that rook on the 7th. This is a perfect example of the strength of a rook on the 7th rank. You see this rook is making it very hard for white to try to, like, activate themselves and do what they need to do. So we see the knight going to f6. We see knight taking e4. We see the knight over to h4. And it's in this position, Andreikin only has like 2 or 3 seconds left. So he's literally playing like hyperbolic chess at this point. And so he's not really calculating correctly. And he's really just kind of hanging himself out to dry as far as tactics go. And Wesley So recognizes this, and he's going to just make him pay for it. We see rook to a4 with check first. The king goes to d5. We see knight down to c3 with check. The king goes up to e6. And as you can see, Andreikin just hung his knight for free. So we do see a rook to a8. And this is a mad check. This is like, you know, like you can't do anything else to this person other than check them. So you guys know what I mean when you're getting literally just kind of demolished. And I mean, you can't beat the person up. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't be violent towards them or something like that. You can't beat them on the board. The only thing you can do to try to cause them some type of anything is to check them. We know it as a spike check. I've done it many times because I'm just like, I'm gonna check you to death until you feel your feelings get hurt. You know, you guys know what I mean. Those chess players out there. King goes to h7. We see the king up to f7. We got knight to e4. We see the king up to f8. We got the knight to g5. We see the rook down to a7. We got the king to h6. We see the king go over to g8, and we see the rook go over to b1. And it is in this position that Dmitry Andreikin actually runs out of time. And, I mean, you can kind of see that white isn't really doing anything in this position. They're down an entire 2 pawns, and they are missing an entire minor piece. So, I mean, just like the game before with Levon Aronian, I mean, you're not playing for anything in this position. Like, you would literally have to clear all the pieces off the board for white to have a chance to win with a king and a rook versus a king. But, I mean, that's not happening. So this is the end of the game. And, I mean, you guys can pretty much look at the board. I don't have to really go any further. Like, in this, every single person that looks at this position is going to be like, yeah, white is dead lost. So we could just end it there. So I appreciate you guys very much. Salamat, spasibo, and I'll see you guys next time.